Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about how to cut tomatoes. So, I know when you cut them sometimes they can kind of get mushy and squish under your knife, so we're going to talk about two different knife options that you can use to avoid this. We're also, of course, going to cut them into a bunch of different shapes, so you can choose whatever the right shape is for whatever you're making. And one note on storing tomatoes before we get started. So, tomatoes are pretty sensitive and they really don't like cold temperatures, so if possible, try to store your tomatoes on the countertop and not in the fridge. If you store them in the fridge, they actually can get a little bit mealy and their flavor just isn't going to be as strong and ripe and delicious. So store your tomatoes on the countertop if possible for better flavor and texture. And this is especially important with underripe tomatoes. They need to ripen on the countertop. So let's get cutting some tomatoes. Okay, so to get started, we need to choose which knife to use. So you can use an all-purpose knife like a chef's knife or a Santoku like this guy, but it has to be really sharp. Feel the blade a little bit, and if it's not sharp, I would say don't use it because a non-sharp knife is going to make your tomato all mushy and collapse under the knife when you try to cut it. The next option is to use a serrated knife. So a serrated knife is just one that has these little teeth in there, and this is really effective for cutting through the tomato skin. Usually, I don't recommend people to use serrated knives for anything other than bread, but tomatoes are definitely the exception because it does such a great job. So I'm going to go ahead and use this for the video in cutting these tomatoes. You want to grab your tomato, and if it has a stem, just go ahead and take that off. Alright, the first way we're going to cut the tomato is into slices, which would be awesome for like sandwiches or burgers or like a caprese salad. So I think the best way to do this is cutting it through the horizontal plane, so cutting it this way versus cutting it this way. And this is because of how the membranes are within the tomato. If we cut it this way, it's just going to hold together better and it's not going to be all juicy slices everywhere. So I'm just going to take this serrated knife and cut right into the tomato. And you're gonna see the serrated knife makes a huge difference. That was so easy, right? So just go ahead and continue your slices through the tomato like that. Okay, so if we wanna cut a tomato into small dice, what I would do is cut it into thin slices like this, so about this thin, depending on how big you want the pieces to be. And then we're just gonna go and cut this tomato into strips just like this. Then we're gonna turn it back and let the knife do the work here, right? Use your outside fingers to hold in the outsides of the tomato, and then we're gonna go back and gently cut it into these little cubes, just like that. And you can do the same exact thing with the bottom part or any other slice. And I'm really letting the little teeth on the knife do the work here. Let them cut into the tomato for you. So there we go. We have a really nice little dice. If we want to do a larger dice on the tomato, we can start by cutting it into larger slices. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, we have this big chunk here. Then I'm going to cut it into some thick strips. And then we can go back and cut it again into bigger pieces like this. So smaller tomatoes, obviously you can use that for salad. You can mix this into soup. This is a really great one for soup. Omelets or eggs in the morning, that one's great. Larger tomato slices like this, probably not gonna be awesome for your eggs in the morning just because they're so big. So this would be a great one to add to a salad. And then for the top of the tomato, a couple different ways you can do it, but one easy way is just to cut right next to where the core is, like this. And then just remove that small core, and we only have a tiny bit of food waste here. So I'm gonna get rid of this one. And then we can go back and cut these however we want. So if I wanted these to be in small dice, I would go ahead, cut them into thin strips gently, and then go back and cut them into the small dice. Or if I wanted it to be large dice, that would be super easy. We would just go right like that. All right, the next way we're gonna cut the tomato is into wedges. So I'm again just gonna remove that little top piece. And now what we're going to do is cut the tomato through in this vertical plane. So I'm just gonna cut it right in half, just like that, through that top. And then I'm gonna take the tomato and I'm gonna cut out the core. So this is just a super easy way, and the serrated knife again is gonna do a great job at that. So just cut like a little triangle, and there we have minimal food waste again. We'll get rid of that, and I'll go back and do the same thing with this one. Okay, now we have our 2 tomato halves, and this is super simple. So all I'm going to do is tilt the tomato and then cut like this to cut the wedges out. You can make these as thick or as thin as you like, and these are awesome for salads. Okay, we can also cut wedges by turning the tomato onto the flat side on the cutting board. And generally, when we are cutting things, it's easier to have the flat side down because it helps it from kind of rolling around when we are trying to cut it. If you're using a regular knife and you don't have a serrated knife, it might be kind of hard to get through the skin side of it. So that's when you really have to make sure your knife is sharp. But if you have a serrated knife, it's no problem. So if I wanted to cut wedges, I could put it down like this and then just cut on an angle towards the center. And the serrated knife really gets into the skin super easily, just like that.